9 Carson City Morgan dollars, 2 submission cohorts, 3 grading services. What we're about to look at isn't a dramatic reveal. It's something far more useful. It's a pattern. Over the course of this project, each of these coins was evaluated, submitted, and returned. Some landed exactly where I expected. A few forced me to refine my standards, and taken together, they tell a clearer story about mint state grading than any single coin could. This is not about which service is better. This is about what the services taught us. This project unfolded in stages. We started with raw coin evaluation, looking at surfaces, focal areas, strike, and eye appeal, without knowing how the services would respond. Then came the submissions. Then the returns. Now, instead of sending everything all at once, I split the coins into 2 groups. Chapter A, what I'm calling the baseline cohort, was designed to establish where the center of gravity really was. Then Chapter B, the refinement cohort, tested whether that center held under tighter scrutiny. Today, we're not regrading anything. The microscope work has already been done. On the right side of your screen, you'll see official grading service images. On the left side, the live images of my slab. What matters now is not suspense, it's consistency. All right, let's begin with Chapter A. This 1883 Carson City is a very honest example of what Mint State 63 looks like in the Carson City series. Starting with the cheek, you definitely see moderate contact. Not a single deep gouge, but a constellation of small disturbances. They're evenly distributed, nothing really catastrophic, but it's clearly not pristine. Now, look outward into the left obverse field. Again, moderate chatter. The surface is active, but not really chaotic. The hair above the ear retains detail, but doesn't quite have the solid strike and uninterrupted smoothness that you would expect to receive a Mint State 64. Overall, luster and eye appeal is fairly decent for an average grade Morgan silver dollar. Nothing really stands out on the obverse. On the reverse, look at the wreath leaf tips, as well as the open fields around the eagle. The reverse is pretty clean on this coin. It's clean enough to remain comfortably mint state, yet still consistent with the mid-range of a Mint State 63 grade. This coin basically defines the baseline. It's not flashy. It's not problematic. It's balanced. This is the equilibrium point for the group. Okay, now compare that to this 1884 cc graded Mint State 62. At first glance, it doesn't look dramatically different. But grading is rarely about dramatic differences. So go back to the cheek. Notice how the chatter clusters more densely? The marks are not necessarily deeper, but there are more of them, and they overlap in key focal areas. The left obverse field shows slightly heavier disturbance. The jawline and neck transition show interruptions that do break the surface continuity. But none of this is fatal. But taken together, the surface integrity drops a notch. And that's essentially the difference between Mint State 63 and Mint State 62. Not just one mark, but accumulation. This coin is still solidly mint state, but it does settle 1 point lower because the eye registers more disruption. So on balance, a solid coin with a little bit more chatter and a grade that reflects. Okay, now here I do not have the official PCGS image, so we have to settle for my own image here. But this time we have an 1884cc graded Mint State 63 by PCGS. Now, look at the cheek first. It is cleaner than the Mint State 62 we just examined. It's similar in overall feel to the 63. The obverse field shows moderate chatter, but again, pretty evenly distributed. The strike is typical for the date. Hair detail is present. Not razor sharp, but certainly not weak. And what's important here, what we're trying to point out, is not a comparison between services. It's alignment. This Mint State 63 looks like a Mint State 63. It doesn't really argue or dispute the earlier CAC grade. It basically agrees with it. And that consistency matters. When you submit a coin that is appropriately a Mint State 63, you would expect that different grading services would come to a reasonably same conclusion. In this case, I think they did. I believe that CAC and PCGS graded these coins appropriately at Mint State 63. Coins have wonderful luster, decent strikes, and yes, abrasions and chatter that are somewhat moderate, but not so concentrated in any one focal area that it would cause the grade to be lowered. Okay, now we've got an 1884cc that NGC graded Mint State 64. So we step up a grade. Start again at the cheek. Notice the difference? Fewer marks. More uninterrupted surface. The chatter is lighter and more dispersed. Move into the upper obverse fields, much cleaner. The hair above the ear shows stronger separation. This coin doesn't scream perfection. It whispers preservation. That's what Mint State 64 is in this context. It isn't flash. It isn't drama. It's restraint. When you compare it to the earlier MS-63 examples, you can see the separation. Not dramatic, but sustained. That sustained cleanliness is what pushed it up a grade. All right, now we get to the lower boundary of the baseline cohort. This 1878 cc returned uncirculated details cleaned. Focus on the fields. Notice how they're a little bit more dull. There is visible surface impairment, disruption that goes beyond simple contact. The disturbance is not just chatter from circulation era handling. It interrupts the integrity of the metal itself. Now, the coin still retains mint state characteristics. There is no wear. CAC is saying, look, originality is still present in areas. We can identify this is an actual Morgan dollar 1878 Carson City. The problem is, mint state does not mean original surfaces. And in this case, the surfaces on this coin have been altered by cleaning, whether by polishing or chemical dip or whatever. So the surface quality and originality can still be mint state even if it has been disturbed by cleaning. And that's where the grading services draw a line. When surface impairment crosses that threshold, numeric grading stops, and that's where a detailed grade is returned. This coin defines that lower edge. And including it strengthens the integrity of the entire experiment. All right, let's move on to the chapter B, Refinement Cohort. This 1883 cc received a mint state 63 grade. By now, the pattern should feel somewhat familiar. Moderate cheek chatter, pretty balanced fields, strong enough preservation to remain comfortably mint state, but not the sustained cleanliness of a mint state 64. What's notable here is predictability. When you can identify the grade band before submission and the result confirms it, that's not boring. That's validation of your evaluation process. Now, this coin does have some, artificial marks or substance on it, but nothing that is breaking the surface or altering the originality of the surface luster or condition of those fields. As a result, on balance, CACG felt this grade was a mint state 63. All in all, I think it's a pretty reasonable grade, and I can definitely agree with it. I mean, the reverse overall is very clean when you look at it. Beautiful luster. On the obverse, it's the density of abrasions in the obverse fields that limited that grade to a 63. All right, now we've got another 1884 mint state 63, but it's not identical. Look closely at the distribution of the marks. They may sit in slightly different places, perhaps a touch heavier in one field, lighter in another. But examining the overall coin, The total surface story adds up to the same conclusion. Grades are ranges, not clones. Two coins can look different and yet still occupy the same numeric space. This coin reinforces that idea. The reverse on this coin, remarkably clean. Pretty solid strike on the breast feathers. No real abrasions of any significance in the fields. You've got a little bit of chatter going on around the motto on the edge. And you've actually got some die breaks going on that make it a little bit more interesting coin from that perspective. But overall, luster, detail, eye appeal, and overall quality of that coin, I believe is appropriate at Mint State 63. Okay, now we've got an 1884, but we drop to a Mint State 61. Return to the cheek. Notice how the chatter is significantly heavier, more disruptive. The fields feel busier. There's less visual cohesion. This coin remains mint state. It was never circulated. But the accumulation of marks, especially in prime focal areas, pushes it clearly below the 62 threshold. This is how the lower mint state range expresses itself. Not by failing, but by settling into a more active surface profile. Now, this coin is interesting because clearly the reverse is far cleaner than the obverse. There's much less chatter and abrasions going on this coin. However, as nice as the reverse on this coin is, the grade is going to be limited by the obverse. And the significant chatter and noise throughout the focal areas and the fields on the obverse of this coin is clearly what limited it to a Mint State 61. This 1884 Carson City came back CAC Unk details cleaned. Now, the second details coin confirms something important. The impairment is visible. The fields on the obverse are consistent with the threshold we saw earlier. When you see the same outcome across different examples with similar surface disruption, it stops feeling arbitrary and begins feeling a little more systematic. And honestly, it's that consistency that you really want when submitting coins for grading. So once again, this coin is a beautiful specimen of a Carson City Morgan dollar. It is clearly a genuine dollar as certified by CAC, and it is mint state uncirculated. Unfortunately, the surfaces are no longer original, and that's why they have returned a grade of details. What they're saying with Unk details is exactly that. It is a legitimate Morgan dollar in uncirculated condition that has had its surfaces altered to a degree where it is no longer eligible for a numeric grade. And that's where the details grade comes from. Now, take a step back and look at all 9 coins together. The dominant grade across this group is Mint State 63. That's the center of gravity. The Mint State 64 required sustained cheek cleanliness and field integrity. Mint State 62 and 61 demonstrated cumulative surface disruption. The details coins crossed a visible line in metal integrity. Across surfaces, the results aligned more often than not. That alignment reinforces a broader point. When you focus on surfaces, not plastic, grading becomes more predictable. And predictability in grading is not a flaw. It's a sign of discipline. All right, so what are our final conclusions? This project was never about chasing the highest grade. It was about testing the evaluation. Chapter A established the baseline. Chapter B refined it. Together, they confirmed that the real work happens before submission, not after. If you study the cheek, if you study the fields, if you study surface continuity, the numbers start to make sense. And when grading results become understandable instead of mysterious, that's when you know your process is working. And that is the value of doing this the right way.